And if you've gotten a lot of help from Peterson's work, that's really cool. I would never take that away from you. In fact, I think there's some advice in here that's genuinely really good.
Well, as someone who has gotten a lot of help from Jordan Peterson's work, I genuinely appreciate Abigail Thorn, aka Philosophy Tube, putting this in her video. However, I also feel obligated to point out that most of what she says regarding Jordan Peterson is ignorant and ill-informed and worthless, and I would say most likely purposely misrepresented for the sake of performativity. In some cases, her claims are literally the opposite of reality, and I will show you what she says and what Jordan Peterson says back to back, and you can see for yourself. But overall, I think this video is just one more piece of evidence that most of the criticism, not all, but most of the criticism people make against Jordan Peterson is irrelevant and should be dismissed as such. So let's just jump in and start with her most generic criticism.
For instance, I can't help but notice that if I did everything Peterson suggests, clean my room, take responsibility, yada yada yada, I would still be living in a country where I'm not allowed to get married, start a family, or get healthcare the same way everyone else is. Unfortunately, no amount of self-help is going to fix all of your problems.
No reasonable person suggests, and least of all Jordan Peterson, that all of your problems will be solved if you just focus on yourself. In fact, Jordan Peterson's biggest criticism of the psychoanalysts like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud is that they fail to take into account the degree to which psychological problems are actually external and exist outside of the person's immediate control.
The psychoanalytic idea is sort of like, well, if you just got your act together, everything would work out for you. It's like, yeah, there's some truth in that. But you know, if you're 55 years old and you've just been laid off work, and maybe through no fault of your own, it isn't obvious how much getting your act together is going to help you find another job, because the actual problem that you're facing may have relatively little to do with you.
Peterson isn't saying that if you focus on yourself, all of your problems are going to be solved. What he's saying is that the best strategy you have for improving your own life and the lives of everyone around you is to start getting your own life in order, right? The people who are going to solve the climate crisis, for example, are not out in mobs protesting like morons. They are the engineering students focusing on their studies, managing their stress, getting their life in order so that they can become competent engineers and facilitate the kind of technological advancements necessary in, say, battery technology so we can end our reliance on fossil fuels by switching over to solar power, because solar power is very cheap to produce but incredibly expensive to store because battery technology hasn't caught up yet. So if you want to become the kind of person capable of solving large-scale social problems, you first have to become the kind of person capable of solving the problems that exist right in front of you.
I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world.
Now, Abigail Thorn's philosophical criticisms of Jordan Peterson are equally misinformed. She tries to fit his work into delineated boxes based on an academic understanding of philosophy, and then she just casually dismisses the role that biology and scientific inquiry plays in his work.
There's this weird tension in Peterson's work because he's trying to have his cake and eat it. The core of it is subjective phenomenological experience, and then he builds out to a kind of structuralism where he says the world is interpreted through stories that get their meaning from outside the text, but then he just stops. He seems so incurious about who gets to tell stories, whose meanings are allowed to stick and whose are not. What Peterson does is he cuts right in the middle there and he says, it's biology.
So again, this is just easily dismissible criticism, because the question is not whose meanings are allowed to stick and who gets to tell stories. The question that Peterson is concerned with is, how is it that over tens of thousands of years and cross-culturally, the same patterns emerge in stories in every culture, from small tribes to major civilizations? It has nothing to do, or very little to do, with power dynamics and who's in charge. It has to do with what has the history of human evolution selected for in our storytelling past. The fact these stories keep showing up independent of culture indicates that there is in fact a biological reason that we think in terms of stories, and that the stories we tell tend to have the same pattern. And this is what Abigail just dismisses. And in fact, she acknowledges this and actually explains it pretty well, which again makes me think that she's purposely misrepresenting everything else he says for the sake of a funny, well made artistic video.
Like Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. Supposedly there are these proto-myths that keep coming up in our stories again and again. Peterson's always talking about this stuff. He's always analyzing Disney or Harry Potter and saying, oh hey, you know, this symbol, it's actually a very old thing from ancient whatever, and if you learn these maps of meaning that structure your experience, then you can start taking control of your life.
It's a very old thing from ancient whatever, and supposedly these patterns appear, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay. Obviously, she's not very serious, which is fine. But the idea that Peterson is some biological determinist, that he uses genes and genetics to justify all the terrible things in the world, it's like pointing out that biology is important is not the same as biological determinism, and it's certainly not what Peterson believes.
Our genes were tooled by a blind watchmaker, and there's this deterministic, soulless process at the base of our biological being. And I don't buy that. I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
So you're saying, like the lobsters, we're hardwired as men and women to do certain things, to sort of run along tram lines, and there's nothing we can do about it?
No, I'm not saying there's nothing we can do about it, because it's like in a chess game, right? There's lots of things that you can do, although you can't break the rules of the chess game and continue to play chess. And your biological nature is somewhat like that, is it sets the rules of the game, but within those rules you have a lot of leeway.
So this last criticism from Abigail Thorn has to do with, according to her, Jordan Peterson accuses people of being fueled by resent in order to dismiss and distinguish himself from them.
The point of accusing your enemies of being fueled by resentment is that it gives you an excuse not to listen to them.
So this is just the biggest joke from this video, because it's clearly, you know, she says the point of accusing your enemies of being resent is then you don't have to listen to them. It's like, okay, that's a good rationalization, but it's literally the opposite of the truth. To say that Peterson would put other people in groups as bad or irrational and then distance himself from that is literally the opposite of his entire philosophy, which is about how you, the individual, and him and me have within us the capacity for evil, and saying, well, only other people are capable of bad is the definition of ignorance.
You construct a community of people, Marxists, feminists, trans people, who are irrational and resentful and hateful, not like us. We are compassionate and thoughtful. Not like us. We are compassionate and thoughtful.
Everything horrible that human beings have done was done by human beings, and you're one of them. And so if you don't understand that, and to understand that really means to know how it was that you could have done it, and that's a shattering thing. To try to imagine that, to try to imagine yourself as someone who's engaged in medieval torture, to see how you could in fact do that. You're never the same after you learn that. You cannot be a good person until you know how much evil you contain within you. It is not possible.
And like I said at the beginning of the video, I have gotten a lot of help from Jordan Peterson, which is why, you know, I'm probably a little angry and resentful myself that someone as big as Philosophy Tube would make a video criticizing him and then doing it so poorly. And it's especially annoying because Philosophy Tube and Abigail Thorn has made good videos having to do with suicide and mental health that I've certainly got benefit from. And it just sucks that she then treats this issue so unseriously. And I really think it is accurate to say that she's doing this for the sake of performativity. In fact, she more or less admits it.
Fortunately, on this channel, we don't care about being right. Every episode of Philosophy Tube is wrong. In fact, I refuse to be correct. The goal is to be wrong in interesting ways.
And maybe that's a joke, but I think it's more of a half joke. I think she's more genuinely interested in the artistic side of things, which is why her videos are so, you know, I mean, they're very well done and creative and interesting, and they are useful for the most part, except when they are flagrantly misrepresenting someone who doesn't deserve to be misrepresented. And, you know, maybe that's just my opinion, and maybe that's how I'm wrong in my own interesting way. So, thank you for watching, and if you disagree with me, let me know, and we can talk about it. Or, yeah, good luck and Godspeed.